Next thing that we have to configure in our project is the startup class file. As I've said before, most of the things are similar like the product API, so we can open the startup file in the product API. Here, let me copy everything that we have inside configure services. We will paste that in our new startup class file. We can remove controllers as well as Swagger Gen because that is present in the product API. So we will overwrite those things, and if we go back to the original startup file, we are just adding authentication. Let me copy this and then close that startup file so that we don't confuse ourselves. We will be adding authentication before authorization. That looks good. Now if you go to the top, we need to add the application DB context. That class, if we go to our product API, is inside DB context folder. So let's create that folder here. And then let me copy all of the content. Let me first copy the class name. Let me create that class here. Whoops, I forgot to rename. Let me do that. Perfect. Let's go to the application DB context and let me copy everything. Of course, we don't want to seed our database, so we will remove that. Let me just minimize. Okay, looks good. Copy and paste it right here. We will remove onModel creating method altogether. Right now, let me also comment the DB set out, and we'll do control dot to add the using statement for Entity Framework Core. This looks good for the DB context. Let's go back to the startup class file. Let's do control dot for the using statement. Now I'll again point this out, never add the reference to other project. Microservices will be self-isolated. So we'll add the using statement for the local DB context. Then with the use SQL Server, we'll be adding Entity Framework Core. Connection string is good because we are using default connection. If we examine our app settings.json, we are using default connection. So that is good. Next, we'll do control dot for the IMapper, and we'll add the using statement for AutoMapper. We don't have a mapping config in this project, so let me copy the name and let's create that. Let me copy the code from the mapping config inside the product API. We'll copy this, close this, and I'll paste it right here. Now the class names, we don't have that, so let me keep this in comment right now, and we'll add control dot for using AutoMapper. Great, looks good. Let me close this as well. Go back to our startup file. We don't have the repositories yet. We'll keep it commented, and we'll do control dot for the token validation parameters. Looks good. We don't have any other error. One thing that I will change here is the name of the API. I will change that to Shopping Cart API. So perfect. With this, the base setup for our API looks good with the authentication that we added for bearer token with the identity server URL, and things are looking good. Now ideally this URL you will retrieve from appsettings.json, so you can add a URL and retrieve that in all the API project. But I won't touch that right now. In the next video, let's decide on what models we want to create or what tables we want to create in our database.